Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I am the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Lucy Shen. She's a developer advocate. What does that mean? No clue, but I'm pretty sure she'll fill me in when I ask her. And she was an engineer at one point as well. And I also learned she's into cosplay. I'm not even sure I'm pronouncing that right. So
I see Elisa completely sold me out.
so I don't know what it means. So I'll definitely ask her about that too. And from the bit of research I did on her, I saw she's a musician as well. I mean, what does she not do? She's making me feel lazy. So let's get into it. Welcome to Teach the Geek interviews, Lucy.
Hello, nice to meet you, Neil. Good to have you. Or rather, thank you for having me. Oh my God, I went into podcast mode myself. I was like, I'm the host now. This is my podcast. Good to have you, Neil.
Yes, we're doing things in reverse.
Oh my goodness. Hostile takeover.
No doubt. So I saw from the research I did on you that you got your degree in computer science. So what was the motivation to get that degree?
For sure. I actually, amusingly, and I know this is buying into a little bit of a stereotype, but my parents were probably the only Chinese parents I knew who didn't want me to get a computer science degree. But I ended up with one anyway. I went into college thinking I was going to do theater or film or journalism, actually, because that was like my thing in high school. And then I took a CS 101 class basically in the first year and just kind of fell in love with the discipline. It was just like, it came so naturally to me. I had no idea it was so much like problem solving. And then once I got those gears turning in my brain, there was no shutting it off. So I just went ahead and finished the whole degree.
Wow. You know, I did engineering when I was in school, and I had to take a computer science class the first semester, and that was my worst class, and it was the class I liked the least. And I
That is the
remember
story I
thinking,
hear.
well, I remember it I remember it so vividly. It wasn't I don't remember it fondly. It was a whole lot of failure, of me trying to do things and it just not working, and me just thinking I don't have the patience for this. So
Oh,
computer science, computer engineering, that definitely was not the path that I was going to take, just based on that. But I'm glad that there are people like you that do have the patience to see their programs come to fruition.
it's the failure that makes it worth it in the end, because after you've failed like 50 times trying to get your code to work, when it finally does work, it's that payoff. I get so much like, I don't know what it is, dopamine, serotonin, something's going on in the brain. The reward centers light up. So yeah.
I also mentioned in the intro that you're a developer advocate. So what exactly does a developer advocate do?
It's a good question. It's a pretty new role in the tech industry. I would say that like I guess the need arose because a lot of developers started to use like APIs from other companies, right? Where companies started to offer technical solutions to a lot of people. And so our customers became technical in many ways across the industry. And that's where we needed developer advocates to step in and become kind of the interface for our technical customers and the company. So for example, in my case at Intuit, working on third-party APIs. And so in order to help developers get a grasp on like how to get that working for them if they were to run into a bug or not have access to a good demo, that would obviously provide kind of a bad customer experience. And our technical customers are just as much our customers as anyone else. So we provide the support basically and close the feedback loop on that front. So we represent the voice of the developer to the company, and then we represent the company back to the developer.
Oh, okay, interesting. I mean, I also mentioned that you were an engineer at one point. So what prompted your switch from engineer to developer advocate?
Yeah, I was an engineer for a good like 4 years almost. And the switch kind of happened. I had been thinking about it for a while. I actually was thinking about switching into product management specifically. There was just a general sense that like I really enjoyed doing developer education. I used to work on a platform team, which meant that we served both technical and non-technical customers, and we had to onboard them onto our platform. And it was that onboarding work actually and documentation work, which I know makes me sound like an alien, but like one of my favorite parts of the work was the documentation and the teaching aspect, which I think naturally filled into that role on my team because nobody else liked to do it. And that's generally what I see. The pattern is that like most developers do not enjoy doing developer education and documentation. But for me, that was like what I enjoyed the most. Unfortunately, as much as it was valued by my team because no one else wanted to do it, and I was like glad to step into it, it's not really the kind of thing that's rewarded by engineering rubrics, right? So when the career ladder comes into play, like this isn't the kind of work I was going to get promoted for. And so as much as I knew I wasn't going to have trouble getting promoted, it still felt like the bulk of my favorite part of the work wasn't being recognized by my main job function. And so I started to look for something that would reward that kind of work more. And I started to gravitate towards product management. But that's when Elisa, the person who recommended me to you, that's when she stepped in and told me about this new role that she was working on. At the time, it was technical evangelist, but technical evangelist and developer advocate are kind of two sides of the same coin, with the goal of becoming much more in the developer advocate side of things in the long run. And so she pulled me onto her team. And that's, I mean, the rest of the story is just my job since then. So.
Okay, that's interesting. So to work as a developer advocate, is it a benefit to having a technical background? I mean, is it possible to be a developer advocate without having a technical background?
I'm sure it's possible, but I feel like it'd be really hard because a lot of the job, and my job is still very much, okay, every developer advocate's job is kind of different, but I think without the technical backing, it's a little bit hard to communicate with developers, honestly. Because developers have a certain way of communicating with each other, and a lot of it is founded entirely on like how the code works. And if you're not able to explain that to people, then there's kind of no point, I guess, in you being a developer advocate, because you'd have to jump through a lot of hoops just to learn what you needed to teach, I guess, to put it simply.
Okay. What's the career path for someone who's a developer advocate?
Good question. I'm still trying to, it's such a new role. I think a lot of us are still trying to figure that out for ourselves. A lot of developer advocates are kind of influencers, which is really interesting. Little micro celebrities in their own right on the internet. Because developer advocates aren't, necessarily, it's about developer education and communication. And so a lot of them present at conferences a lot. They'll have their own YouTube channels or their own podcasts, or that's just like kind of the line of work that comes in with this skill set. And so I don't know if that's necessarily a career path, but that's where a lot of the most high profile people in this field end up. And so I think a lot of us end up looking to them almost as role models, but I will say it's not the only path. Like I think a lot of the best developer advocates I've met in my years doing this so far, haven't been influencers. They just kind of, you don't have to yourself be the face of the company or the face of the technology. You can just be the person who enables other people to understand how to use it. And you don't necessarily have to be the person who's doing the teaching necessarily. So if I were to, for example, a lot of our Intuit open source projects that are happening right now, like my job as a dev advocate isn't to personally present on what all of those projects are and how to use them and why you should want to use them and how to adopt them. But to make room and create a platform so that our open source maintainers can themselves go and bring it to the big stage, right? So the influencer path isn't for everyone, nor is it the only way to go forward. But I will say it's the most high profile way to do it. And I think it may be what brings a lot of people into the field. I think in the long run, a lot of dev advocates, it's kind of a strange career ladder in that I don't know that it necessarily has a ladder. Probably eventually you end up more like a PM because a lot of our jobs kind of overlap with product management. I mean, I talked about how I was thinking about going into product management in the first place, and I have product manager training also at this point. And the two roles are very similar in many ways. It's just that dev advocates are almost like a more like technical, I guess, product manager. So I don't know. You could really take it anywhere you want, but I will say that like probably amongst the most, the end game, the high flying people that I know, they end up as like basically directors of like their company's developer advocacy organizations. And that's usually where I see people, I guess, for lack of a better term, end up, because this role again is so new. We don't actually know what the end game looks like yet.
Wow, I commend you for taking on a role where you're not exactly sure where it's going to end up. There's a lot of people that kind of want that certainty. If I start off in this place, I know there is this career path, there's this ladder that I can go up. I start here, then I go here, then I go here, and then I end up here. And then this is what I need to do to move up this ladder. But with you, you're starting at a place and not knowing where it's going to go afterwards. And I think that's actually really cool that you were willing to take that risk.
I think it's exciting to like forge a new path, right? And I like on my current team right now, we're into its first developer advocacy team. Like we've never really had one before. That's what Elisa was starting to build while she was still here, but it's still so nascent. Like we're getting to define what this team does. And I feel like building a charter from scratch is part of what makes the work interesting. And having, there are definitely a few role models, a few trailblazers that we can follow. But there's also a lot that we can decide for ourselves. And I think the flexibility is what makes the job interesting. And it's so different, right, from the developer role where everything was actually kind of cut and dried in terms of your career path. There's certainly lots of room for flexibility and creativity within the developer role, but in terms of like where your career is going, there's kind of only a few, like you become the tech lead or an engineering manager, and then you either go down that people management path or like the architect path, right? It's very, very well defined, but I think the lack of definition is what makes the role interesting. So for me, at least, that's what makes it fun. Yeah.
Well, yeah, well, it's as I said, it's great to have people like you that are willing to take on that. I mean, the fact that there isn't there isn't that definition, and you have to kind of build it as you go, because there's a lot of people like, I want it more structured, but especially if you're someone like yourself who's involved with the creation of it and how it ends up being, I think that's really exciting.
I
So
agree. Exactly.
that's really cool. I'm also mentioning in the intro that you're into cosplay. Did I pronounce that right, Lucy?
You did say it correctly. Yeah.
So what is cosplay and how'd you get into it?
Yeah, it's probably one of my top most time-consuming hobbies. I'll put it that way. But cosplay is a portmanteau word of costume and play. And it actually originated probably in like East Asia, probably mostly in Japan. I haven't honestly looked into the history of it that much, but it comes from wanting to dress up as your favorite anime characters or game characters. So for me, at least, it started with a certain anime. Sorry, it was actually a manga called Katekyo Hitman Reborn that I really got into when I was in middle school. And then my friend who got me into it was like, "Hey, you want to dress up as the characters from this manga?" And I was like, "What the heck? Why would I do that?" And she was like, "Oh, well, actually, there are these like conventions that happen through the year where people who also really love these anime and manga will congregate together. And a lot of times people, you don't have to, but a lot of people will wear costumes of their favorite characters, just as an expression of love for the art form, I guess, and to identify each other in the crowd, right? Because at a glance, I can see, oh, that person is also a fan of the exact same franchise because they're wearing this costume. So it's a little bit of like a signaling, finding each other, and also just a way of expressing your love for something. And I think it also really gets the crafters gears turning in my brain when sometimes it's nice to just put your hands to something physical and make something, like create something, right? Back in high school and middle school is when I had time to do that kind of thing. Nowadays, I buy or commission most of my cosplays and just wear them for fun. But I think that the part of creation and expressing love together in community with people is what makes cosplay so fun.
Interesting. So it's like Halloween without begging people for candy.
Exactly. It's Halloween for us all year for cosplayers. Yep. And then
That's
the funny part is Halloween comes around and none of us know what to wear.
Are you serious?
Because we're all like, it's so niche, you know? Like, oh, I'm gonna wear this really niche cosplay that only like 20 people at this convention are gonna know, let alone if I were to go out on Halloween and like, because Halloween, you want something people will recognize, right? Or like kind of a joke of a costume in many cases. So we always have to sit there and like have a headache trying to figure it out.
That's hilarious. So 364 days of the year, you know exactly what the costume's going to be. But
Yes.
for that one day, October
We're suddenly
31st,
at a
it's like, I
loss.
don't know. No, we have no clue. That's hilarious. Wow, that's so interesting. I really don't know much about that. So thank you for that explanation of cosplay. Now you learn something new every day.
Very deep into nerd and geek culture, if that's your thing. Everyone eventually ends up there.
Yeah, I mean this podcast is called Teach the Geek, so you would
Exactly.
think I would know a little bit more about that, but I guess maybe I'm not as much of a geek as I think I am.
There are all kinds of geeks in the world. Yeah.
Indeed, there are. I mentioned also in the intro that I believe you're a musician as well. So if I'm right about that, how'd you get into that?
Well, I was one of those, not to constantly invoke the Chinese parent stereotypes right now, but my parents had me learn piano basically as I was growing up. But ultimately, that's not where I ended up. I ended up in the world of like vocal music. So I really like doing singing and songwriting also, but that's a little bit of a different track. And I don't know, at some point I just realized that like I enjoyed singing and then I would do it a lot. And then eventually I got kind of good at it because that's what happens when you do something a lot. So I started to sing like covers on YouTube back in 2011. I started to post them, and then slowly the quality, again, as you do something a lot, you get better at it. And so the quality of my covers and original music started to get better and better. And so as I explored it as a hobby, I don't know, it just kind of grew from there. So now I also, and similar to cosplay, it's a space where I found a community of people. It turns out there's a whole community of people singing nerdy Japanese music online from like their favorite animes, which is kind of the genre that I was focused in for quite a few years there. And then once we found each other on, mostly it was on, oh my God, back in the day it was on Skype, and then it was on Twitter, and now the whole community is still on Twitter. So it's just fun to be singing with people, I guess. So we'll do collaborations, covers, choruses, duets together a lot. And I just continue to make friends in this space because people will approach me and be like, you want to sing this song together? And I'm like, sure. And in that process, you get to know people really well, and usually get to take on like a fun challenge of a song that you haven't sung before, right?
Have you ever partnered with somebody who, after when you're part of the, going through the whole process of singing, you realize they're not that good?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's definitely differences in skill level. But I guess what you realize is that like it's not so much about skill or how, obviously you would want to sing with someone who is like more impressive, right? And I've also been the person in these duets where I'm the weaker skill level. But I don't think it matters in the end, because the point is that you're like, you agreed to sing with someone because you wanted to sing the song together for whatever reason, whether it was from an anime that you loved or because you like this person's personality and you wanted an excuse to do a project with them. There are a variety of reasons you might sing together with someone, and I think it's also just natural that people will have different skill levels. What's more interesting actually in a duet is whether your voices blend together well. So whether or not you can hit those notes at the optimal, I don't know, belting chest voice or whatever isn't so much important as it is like when you sing in unison, do you sound good together? I think that's always the fun thing, is when I inadvertently run into people who I actually blend really well with, and I'm like, I wouldn't have expected that, but here we are. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. And yeah, I would expect the person who is the weaker link to say it doesn't matter. Not the person who's really good. Like, you know what? I don't
I've
know
been
why.
both the weaker link as well as the stronger one, so I guess I've had a taste of both sides.
Nice. That's wonderful. Lucy, when I first started this podcast, the main focus, or the reason I did it, is based on my own struggles, having to give presentations in front of others, working as an engineer. And these people that I had to give presentations were in front of were the senior management people. So CEO, CTO, COO, C fill in the blank O, all the C's. And I wasn't very good at it at first. And I got a lot better at it over time because I saw the benefit in doing so. And so I really was interested in hearing from other people that had technical backgrounds about their public speaking journeys. At what point did you realize that public speaking or giving better presentations could be of use to you?
Uh, oh my God. I guess I actually kind of have an origin story for this, which is that back in third grade, we did we started to do like speeches, or our teacher would have us do speeches. I don't think this was part of the formal curriculum by any means, but she just, I guess, knew that public speaking was going to be an important skill. I still remember her, Miss August. She got us to choose speech. She would like give us a genre, I think, and then we would choose a speech topic and then give a speech. I think the time it was like a 3 to 5 minute speech on a topic, which is quite long for someone who is in third grade. I just remember that the moment my mom heard about what was happening, because I've always, since very young, always talked to my mom about everything that was happening in my life. And so the moment the speech thing came up, I went to my mom and I was like, oh, we have to give speeches in school. I think it's going to be really fun. And then she just latched onto it and like coached me with extreme pressure, I must say, and high standards, through my first like 3 or so speeches, where literally she would have me like drill it in front of her, the speech, until I had it down pat, and also it was flowing naturally, conversationally. She also had me worm in a bunch of like jokes. And I still remember the response I got to that first speech I ever gave in third grade, where like everyone else was, understandably very nervous, had never done this before, probably hadn't had a mother who drilled it with them for 50 times the night before. And I stood up and with like utmost confidence, delivered this like flawless 3 minute speech. I don't even know what it was about anymore. It had jokes in it. People were like laughing. I got big applause at the end, right? And after that, I was like, oh, I mean, I hated the drilling. I was like, why are we doing this? Like, why does it matter so much? I still remember thinking like, why is she so intent on getting me to perfect this? It's just a silly little speech that we're doing. But after that, I was like, wow, okay, public speaking is how I have influence, I think, is the lesson that I learned that day. I didn't have no idea what charisma meant yet at that time, but I think that was the first step towards building like the charisma that I now leverage like naturally as a daily tool. It was that like the 50 drills that my mom ran with me the night before that speech, and then delivering the speech and like learning the value of it instantly, right? The instant reward of that. I was like, oh, this is something that's important. And through it all, the more I did it, I think we gave probably a good 5 speeches that year in third grade. by the end of it, I realized that like so much of it came down to delivering things naturally, having a sense, not necessarily, you don't have to be funny, but you have to have a sense of humor, right? A lightness to your delivery, so that you carry people along with you. This was the kind of skill that I learned the value of it in third grade. I wasn't good at it yet, but over time it just like became a skill that I built because I knew the importance of it, like you said. Yeah.
Wow, that's really cool. And sounds like your mother is similar to my mother. So when I was a kid, I used to give presentations as well, and it wasn't because I wanted to. It was because either it was assigned in school, or it was something that it was even extracurricular that my mother signed me up for. So I would find out about it after she had signed me up for it. You're going to be doing this.
Yeah,
I'd be
that
like,
sounds
oh,
right.
wonderful. So then also, like your mother, there was a lot of drilling, a lot of practicing. And looking back on it, it doesn't make any sense because I'm not an only child. I have two other siblings, and they didn't do any of this stuff. So I always think, why me? Why
Yeah, I
focusing
feel
on
you. I
me?
had a younger brother also who was spared this.
I
He's a
wasn't.
perfectly adequate public speaker, so clearly it wasn't necessary. But
Yeah, I
yeah.
have an older sister. I have a younger sister. I'm the only boy, but maybe that was the
Oh.
reason. But she left them alone. But it was always me. It's like, and I was a lazy child too, Lucy. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, if she didn't force me to do stuff, I wouldn't do a thing. Even now, as an adult, I have to motivate myself so much to actually get up and do stuff.
I'm the same way.
Yeah, but that's my life. So, but when it comes to the presentations that you have to do or that you do you
Mhm.
have a process for putting them together? And if so, what is it?
Yeah, it really depends on the presentation. I will say that I have my webinars and podcasts down to a science. So like you, I also host a podcast, but it's for work. It's not a personal one. And when the time comes, eventually everyone leaves the company, I will also hand it off. So it's not my podcast to take with me, but currently I'm the host. And I think I do a pretty similar process with the podcast and webinars, which is that I think anything that involves a guest I like to set it, I like to be like very structured with it, because I think a lot of times when you bring on guests, this is different, right? Like you literally bring on public speakers to your podcast. For the podcast where you're bringing on engineers and people who are not accustomed to public speaking, I feel like the most important thing is to get people situated and comfortable and feel like they know what to expect. So basically like an expectation setting kind of a procedure, because these are people who are, again, not accustomed to speaking in front of a live audience or in front of a camera even. So they get really early on, I learned this lesson the hard way, I guess, where if I underprepared people, they would get really nervous, really jittery. The lines would come out kind of funny, or they would try to pre-script everything and just like read off of a script in a very robotic voice. So I was like, this is not going to work. And so the process with podcasts and webinars, when I have guests who are usually technical and usually not very well versed at public speaking, is I'll have a document set up where I have all of the questions that I plan to ask them written out beforehand. And I tell them very clearly, like, we want to keep the tone conversational, but I'm also giving you the questions beforehand so that you can prepare, annotate your answers a little bit. And I'd like you to use bullet points so that you're not literally reading a script off, but at least you know where you're going. You're not going to get lost. And you'll be hopefully minimally nervous because you already know. And maybe if you wanted to, you had a chance to rehearse as well. And I find that that really helps to assuage the kind of anxiety that a lot of people come into this with, because then they want to do public speaking. They want recognition for their work. They want that kind of like in the public eye experience, but at the same time, they're very anxious and nervous about it. So whatever I can do to help strike a balance between like wanting to deliver, getting them to the point where they are saying what they want to say with the minimal anxiety, because they've been prepped and we've done, one quick dry run session beforehand as well. That's of course, to me, it also organizes my thoughts. Like it forces me to sit down and spend 30 minutes to an hour like preparing the flow of a conversation, so I know where it's going to go and I can manage it better. And obviously we can still, change course, change tack in the middle of a conversation. And I tell them that I'm like, I might shuffle the question order, I might ask you follow-up questions because we want to keep it natural. But at the same time, people have a document that they're able to follow along with and be minimally nervous for. So I think since these are situations in which I am not the sole presenter, but I have other people that I'm interviewing, and they are not as comfortable in front of a camera as I am, it's important to get them as close to that as possible. Yeah.
I commend you for your empathy, Lucy. I don't have it.
You're like, I don't care.
I really don't. I'm a firm believer in organic type conversations, and those are really difficult to have when you know what the questions are beforehand, because oftentimes all you're doing is giving me rehearsed answers, and then it's not all that fun for me, and it's not all that fun for the audience anyway.
Yeah.
So sometimes when people ask me for the question beforehand, I may very well send them the questions, and then I don't ask them those questions. because I'm a
But it's
jerk
just
like
like,
that.
these are the kinds of questions you might get, is also like it, just so people
Oh,
know what to
oh
expect
no,
a
no, I
little
don't
bit.
even do that. I say, no, these are going to be the questions. And
Oh,
then,
you just lie to them.
oh yeah, I lie. Yeah, absolutely.
I
And
love
then, yes,
it.
and then they get
Misdirection.
completely different questions. Absolutely. Oh, you thought you were
Mhm.
prepared? Surprise. Oh, I love it. It's so much fun for me.
As long as you're having fun, honestly, it's your podcast.
Indeed,
So
absolutely. I'm over 200 episodes in. I'm still doing it. I love it. It's
exactly.
great for me. So when it comes to giving presentations, do you ever get nervous? And if so, how do you deal with your nerves?
Yeah, I actually have never gotten over the stage fright. Like I think with like podcasts, actually I'm minimally nervous because it's all pre-recorded, and I know if I really mess up, I'll just beg the host to like edit something out. um but with live things like webinars, I still get a little bit nervous, right? I don't know what it is. Like I did theater in high school too. I did performance arts in college. Like for some reason the stage fright never leaves you. But I think at some point what I realized is that my so-called stage fright, or this feeling of like anxiety, was also excitement. Like it was both. I was excited to be going on stage in front of the camera. I was excited to have a chance to like showcase whatever it was I had been practicing in front of an audience. And so I think over time I just learned to interpret my anxiety and my stage fright as excitement, and the whole thing, it just made it more fun. It's kind of like, you know, the joke people tell where they're like, oh, like when you want to take someone on a date, take them to the amusement park because they will misconstrue their anxiety or their fear about going on a thrill ride as like infatuation with you. I'm like, that's exactly what I've done, but with stage fright. So instead of interpreting it as I'm afraid to go on stage, it's I'm excited to go on stage. And that's kind of how things have I think eventually it just became like it was like a prophecy that, I guess, what's the word when the prophecy like fulfills itself? That's kind of what it is.
Okay, yeah. Although I will disagree with you when it comes to a date, I'm not taking them to the amusement park. I'm taking them to the swimming pool.
Oh, I see.
I want to know what you really look like for real.
I see.
Dunk your head. Get it, get
Mhm,
everything wet.
mhm. You know,
Absolutely.
nowadays they make waterproof makeup, so I don't know if that's gonna work.
Damn it.
Foiled again.
Foiled again for real. Damn. I didn't realize
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
How waterproof is
Now
it?
you know, now you know.
Damn. All right. Well then. So when it comes to the people who are listening or watching this conversation and they want to get better at giving better presentations, what would your number one tip be?
Number one tip to get better at presentations. That's a good question.
As opposed
I
to all the
think
other questions I've asked?
wait, sorry, what?
As opposed to all the other questions I've
I mean,
asked, this
they're
is the
really
good
good
question.
questions, but this is the
Yeah.
only one that stumped me a little bit so far. Like you got me with this one. I think that this for me at least, it comes down to, I think so much I guess I'll kind of pivot it slightly, which is that the way I thought about good presenters and people who I really wanted to watch on stage or talk or whatever setting it is, I wanted to watch them talk. I really wanted to listen. These were the people who had like an unholy amount of charisma. And I've always wondered, like, where does that charisma come from? And I think everyone's source of charisma is different. So probably like, and everyone has a natural charisma about them. Some people tamp it down without realizing because they're so worried and anxious about things. They like don't let it show. But I think everyone has a natural charisma, and everyone's charisma comes from a different place. For me, what I realized is that mine came from this like sort of almost carefree attitude. I have like an ease about me and a relaxed nature, and an ease, like a big smile that comes very naturally to me. And I think that's like the combination of what makes my charisma shine. But I think everyone's is different, and I think solving for and searching for that your natural charisma, not trying to force something on top of you, right? Finding what makes you shine naturally is, I know it's a very like hand wavy answer to the question, and it's also probably the hardest question to answer in the world of public speaking. But for me, at least, that's once I had pinpointed that that's what made me charismatic. I was able to lean into those things, figure out where I might overshoot and overdo it versus like basically striking the right balance in like how I can be casual, but also professional, right? Relaxed, but not overly so. Smiling a lot, but not so much that I look like the Joker. Like this is finding the balance for me. I think was what made me comfortable because I knew what was going to work for me. I knew my toolkit, right? And so learning your tools and then polishing those tools is what makes you uniquely a good presenter is the key.
All
Yeah.
right. Yes. Number one tip: be charismatic. Simple.
Yeah, I guess be charismatic and figure it out, fool.
It's like, yeah, be good. Yeah, okay, gotcha.
Just be good. Got you.
This has been a great conversation, Lucy. Thank you so much for being a guest. How can people get in touch with you?
I guess I've started a professional Twitter now, finally, that I can put out there. So I'm at Spolians on Twitter. That's Spooleans.
Oh,
Spolians.
okay, excellent. Well, everyone, that marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek, and you can learn more about it at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Lucy.
Thank you for having me.